Hi. I'm Claire and you're watching part 2 of my story. If you missed part 1, make sure to watch it, it's where it all began. Last time, my world was shaken, my marriage was on the line, and I never imagined what would come next. Part 2 reveals the shocking events that changed everything. The morning after I confronted Mark, the air in our house felt heavier than ever. I remember standing in the kitchen staring at the coffee pot, thinking about how many mornings we had shared there, sipping lattes and joking about the news. And now, silence. Total silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and Max sniffing around, sensing my mood. I called my lawyer first thing. Her name was Janice, based out of Dallas, and she had this no-nonsense energy I instantly liked. She asked me to bring all documents related to the house, our joint accounts, credit cards, and any evidence I had of Mark's affair. I handed over the photos from the Hilton Garden Inn, texts I had saved, even a Facebook screenshot. Sitting across from her in her tiny office, I felt both nervous and empowered. "So what's our first move?" I asked. She leaned back and said, "We start with temporary orders. You'll live separately, you'll keep Max, and we'll discuss finances. This isn't just a breakup. This is legally splitting up everything you've built together." That hit me like a ton of bricks. Splitting the house, the mortgage, the life I had imagined for the next 5 years. It was scary, but also liberating. The next day, Mark barely reacted when I served him the divorce papers. He sighed, tossed them on the kitchen counter, and muttered something about it being for the best. I stared at him, wanting to scream, "Do you even realize what you've done?" But instead, I let him stew in his own guilt, or maybe indifference. Friends started noticing the change immediately. Sarah, my best friend since college, called me that evening. "How are you holding up?" she asked. I shrugged. "I don't know. Numb, I guess." She sighed. "Want me to come over? We can get wine, talk, cry, scream, whatever you need." And so she came. We opened a bottle of Cabernet from the small wine shop on Coit Road and just sat on my couch talking. She reminded me of all the things I was too close to see. How long I had ignored the red flags, how little respect Mark had shown, and how strong I was for finally taking a stand. It was comforting. I realized I hadn't just been betrayed by my husband. I had also been letting myself be invisible, shrinking to make him comfortable. That night, laughing through tears with Sarah, I started to feel a small spark of hope. Court dates came next. The first hearing was scheduled for late January 2020 in downtown Dallas. I remember walking into the building, tall, cold glass walls, fluorescent lights, that smell of old coffee and paper. I felt like I was stepping into a war zone. Mark was already there, looking sharp in a navy suit, tie perfectly straight. His face was neutral, but I could see a flicker of panic in his eyes when I entered. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and glasses, called the case. We sat there listening to lawyers argue over who keeps what, who pays what, who gets custody of Max. Again, thank God that was mine. I kept my hands folded in my lap, trying not to let him see my panic. Every time he opened his mouth, I felt a mix of rage and disbelief. This man who promised forever was now fighting for the very things he abandoned. I had brought the photos, texts, even some receipts of trips and dinners that didn't match his late work nights. The court listened, asked questions, and I answered as calmly as I could. Honestly, I surprised myself. I had been a wreck for months, but in that courtroom I felt powerful, like I was reclaiming my life piece by piece. After the hearing, we left the courthouse in silence. I drove home, the wind whipping through my hair, Max in the passenger seat like my loyal little sidekick. I remember thinking about how strange it was. Just a few months ago, I couldn't even imagine leaving the house without Mark. Now, I was free. Family reactions were complicated. My mom cried every time she called, worried about me but proud of my courage. My dad, stoic as ever, muttered something about standing up for yourself, which was his way of showing approval. Mark's family, however, was a whole different story. His mom called repeatedly, begging me not to tear the family apart. I listened politely, then gently told her, "Mom, he made his choices. This isn't about revenge. It's about moving forward." It wasn't easy. There were texts from Mark himself, calls at odd hours, even a message that simply said, "I didn't mean for it to happen." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Meanwhile, Mark's life was crumbling. Word got around at his firm about the affair. The image of him sneaking into a hotel while pretending to work didn't sit well with management. Within weeks, he was asked to resign. Suddenly, he didn't have the salary to support the lifestyle he had flaunted: fancy dinners, a gym membership, and weekend trips with his girlfriend. She bailed when she realized he wasn't as rich as she thought. I won't lie, a part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction. Not malice, but a quiet, almost unbelievable sense that karma was finally doing its thing. Meanwhile, I started to rebuild. My 2-bedroom apartment in Plano became my sanctuary. I painted the walls light gray, put up little string lights over Max's bed, and even bought a tiny succulent garden for the windowsill. It was mine. Every corner, every little thing was a reflection of me, not of someone else's expectations. Work became my focus. I threw myself into projects, impressed my boss, and started seeing opportunities for promotions I had never considered when I was tied down by emotional exhaustion. I also reconnected with friends, tried yoga, joined a pottery class, which honestly I was terrible at, but it was fun, and started laughing again without forcing it. Every phone call from Mark that I ignored, every awkward encounter I had managed without breaking down, every court date that ended with me keeping my dignity intact. It all added up. I realized I had grown stronger than I thought possible. Even Max seemed happier. Gone were the nights of sensing tension and trying to calm two humans fighting. Now he ran around, played fetch, and snuggled without the weight of our broken marriage on his little shoulders. By the end of the summer, I felt like I was truly starting over. Not the scared, confused woman who had followed Mark in her car one cold December night, but someone who had reclaimed her life, her worth, and her happiness. And the final twist? Mark reached out months later, trying to come back, realizing that he had lost not just a wife, but respect, stability, and the life he had taken for granted. But by then I had moved on. I had grown. I had learned that freedom sometimes comes through the hardest heartbreaks. When the divorce papers were finally signed, stamped, and filed, I thought I'd feel this rush of relief. You know, like the movies where the woman walks out of court with sunglasses on, blasting Single Ladies, and tossing her ring in the trash? Yeah, that wasn't me. Instead, I drove home in silence. Max sat in the passenger seat, his head out the window, completely unaware that my entire life had just split in half. I parked outside my apartment, sat there for a minute, and just stared at the steering wheel. My hands wouldn't move. My chest was tight. And then, without warning, the tears came. It hit me all at once. The weight of everything. The years I'd spent trying, the holidays I'd pretended were okay, the nights I cried alone. It was over. Not in some abstract way, not "we'll talk about it later," but over. I cried so hard that night I actually scared myself. The kind of ugly crying where your whole face hurts. And the scariest part? The silence that followed. For years, even during the worst fights, Mark had been there in some capacity. Now there was nothing. The first few weeks were the hardest. I'd catch myself setting the table for two. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. and instinctively reach over to his side of the bed, only to find cold sheets. I'd walk down the cereal aisle at Kroger and grab his favorite Honey Nut Cheerios without even thinking. Then I'd stand there holding the box, feeling like an idiot because who was I buying them for? Loneliness is sneaky like that. It shows up in the tiny details. And nights were brutal. During the day I could distract myself, work, errands, even scrolling TikTok mindlessly. But when the sun went down and the world got quiet, that's when it hit the hardest. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about every moment that led me here. Every fight, every lie, every time I ignored my gut. One night, around 2 a.m., I found myself standing in the kitchen in my pajamas, eating Oreos straight from the package and just whispering to myself, "What now? What do I even do now?" That's when I realized I couldn't do this alone. So I went back to therapy. My therapist, Dr. Patel, had this calm, steady voice that made me feel safe. I walked into her office, sat down, and before I even said hello, I just started crying. She didn't flinch. She just handed me tissues and said, "You're safe here. Let it out." Over the weeks, we worked through so much. She helped me see patterns I had ignored. How I gave up little pieces of myself to keep the peace. How I tolerated stress, excuses instead of demanding honesty. How I stayed even when my gut screamed to run. "Divorce doesn't mean failure," she told me once. "It means you refuse to fail yourself any longer." That line stuck with me. Around that time, I also started moving my body again. Nothing extreme. Just walks with Max around the neighborhood, sometimes late at night when the Texas air was cool. At first, I was dragging myself out the door, earbuds in, hoodie pulled tight. But slowly, I started noticing things I hadn't in years. How the streetlights glowed on wet pavement after rain, how the neighbors' Christmas lights lingered well into January, how Max wagged his tail like each walk was the best part of his day. I even signed up for a beginner yoga class at a little studio in Plano. Honestly, I was terrible. I wobbled, I fell over during tree pose, I groaned every time they told us to hold plank. But for that 1 hour, I wasn't the woman who got cheated on. I was just another person breathing, stretching, existing. And that felt good. But let's be real, it wasn't all self-care montages and yoga mats. Some days I hated everything. I'd scroll Instagram and see couples posting Valentine's dinners at Olive Garden or weekend trips to Austin, and it felt like a punch in the gut. I'd see women showing off engagement rings, smiling ear to ear, and I'd think that was supposed to be me. That was supposed to be my life. One day I ran into a mutual friend at Target. She hesitated before saying, "So, how are you doing?" in that pitying voice people use when they don't know what else to say. I wanted to scream, "Don't look at me like I'm broken." But instead I smiled politely and said, "I'm figuring it out." And I was. Clumsily. I filled my evenings with little rituals. Lighting a candle, making tea, journaling before bed. Sometimes I'd write letters to Mark that I never sent just to get the words out of my head. Other times I'd write to myself. Pep talks, affirmations, even angry rants. There was one night I wrote, "He didn't ruin me. He freed me." And for the first time I almost believed it. I also leaned hard on my friends. Sarah was my rock. She'd drag me to Tex-Mex dinners at Mi Cocina, order queso and margaritas, and remind me that I deserved joy. My co-workers started inviting me to happy hours, something I always used to decline because Mark hated when I came home too late. I said yes, and each time I felt a little more alive. Even my parents surprised me. My mom, who I thought would judge me, actually told me, "I'm proud of you." I stayed too long in my own bad marriage. "You're braver than I was." My dad just hugged me one night and whispered, "You'll be okay, kiddo." And little by little I started to believe them. One Saturday morning about 3 months after the divorce, I woke up, made pancakes just for myself, and sat at my kitchen table with Max curled at my feet. Sunlight was pouring through the blinds, and for the first time in years I felt peace. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but peace. And I realized, this was the start of something new. A few months after the divorce I started noticing something weird. I was smiling again. Not big movie star smiles. Just little ones, at random moments. Like when I nailed a presentation at work, or when a neighbor's kid waved at me while riding his bike, or when Max rolled over for belly rubs and looked up at me with those goofy dog eyes. It was like life was quietly reminding me, hey, there's still good stuff here. Work actually became my anchor. I'd been in marketing for years, but during my marriage I never pushed myself too hard. Mark used to say things like, "Don't get too obsessed with work, okay? I don't want you burning out." Which, looking back, was probably just his way of keeping me small. Now I was free. One Monday morning my boss asked me if I'd be willing to take on a new client, an up-and-coming coffee chain expanding across Texas. Normally I'd hesitate, worried about stress or upsetting Mark's work-life balance obsession. But that day I heard myself say, yes. Absolutely. I can do it. And I did. I poured myself into that project, staying late at the office, brainstorming campaigns, even going on site visits. One afternoon I stood inside this brand new location in Austin sipping a latte and realized I was proud of myself. Not because of Mark, not for Mark, not despite Mark. Just me. When our campaign launched and sales spiked, my boss called me into his office. He said, "I don't know what's changed, but you're on fire lately." I smiled and told him, I guess I finally stopped holding myself back. That moment, it felt so satisfying. But it wasn't just work. My social life started shifting too. Sarah kept pulling me out of the house, bless her heart. She dragged me to trivia nights at this little bar in Dallas called The Library. At first I felt awkward, like the divorced woman with baggage. But as the weeks went by, I found myself laughing, high-fiving strangers, even shouting out random answers I wasn't totally sure of. Did you know the state bird of Oklahoma is the scissor-tailed flycatcher? Yeah, I didn't either, but guess who got it right? This girl. Slowly my world expanded. I started reconnecting with old friends too, the ones I had drifted away from during my marriage. One night I met up with my college roommate Jenny, who I hadn't seen in years. Over dinner at Chili's she admitted, "I always felt like Mark didn't want you hanging out with us." She wasn't wrong. Mark had this way of making me feel guilty anytime I wanted to go out without him. But that night, sitting across from Jenny, sipping a strawberry margarita, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost. Another big change. Travel. I hadn't taken a real trip in forever. Vacations with Mark were always practical. Family visits or quick weekend getaways. Nothing spontaneous, nothing just for me. But one day I thought, why not? So I booked a solo trip to Denver. It was terrifying at first. Just me, a carry-on bag, and a list of things I wanted to do. But once I landed and saw the Rocky Mountains for the first time, I felt this rush of freedom. I hiked trails, ate at local diners, even sat alone in a brewery chatting with strangers. One night, I was sitting on a patio sipping craft beer, watching the sunset turn the mountains pink, and I thought, this is my life now. And it's not bad at all. Back home, I noticed my confidence growing in everyday moments. I finally fixed that leaky faucet in my bathroom without calling anyone for help. I put together an IKEA bookshelf all by myself. Okay, it wobbled a little, but still. I learned how to grill chicken on my apartment balcony. Something Mark always insisted was his job. Each little victory reminded me I was capable. And you know what? People noticed. Friends told me I seemed lighter, happier, more me. Even my coworkers commented on the shift. One day Sarah joked, "You're glowing. Is there a new guy in the picture?" I laughed. Nope. Just me. Turns out I'm kind of great company. And that's when it hit me. I didn't need someone else to validate my worth. For so long I had tied my identity to being Mark's wife, to being the supportive partner. Now I was learning to stand alone, and actually enjoy it. Of course, I won't pretend it was all perfect. There were still nights when loneliness crept in, when I'd scroll through photos of couples on Facebook and feel that sting. But those moments didn't wreck me anymore. They came, I acknowledged them, and then I moved on. Because here's the truth, I was building something better. One Saturday morning, Sarah and I went to a local farmer's market in McKinney. We wandered through stalls of fresh peaches, handmade candles, and jars of honey. At one booth, the vendor asked, "Are you two sisters?" We laughed and I said, "No, just best friends." But in that moment I realized, this right here was family too. The people who chose to show up for me. The people I let into my new life. And with every passing week, that life felt fuller. The real turning point came almost a year after Mark walked out. It was a random Tuesday morning in May. I was driving down Central Expressway in Dallas, coffee in hand, radio playing some old Kelly Clarkson song, when it hit me, I wasn't thinking about Mark. Not even a little. 4 months after the divorce, he'd lived rent-free in my head. Even when I was happy, he was like this shadow lingering in the corner of my mind. But that morning, stuck in traffic, humming along to Stronger, I realized he was gone. Not just physically but mentally. And I felt free. That realization gave me the courage to take a step I'd been secretly considering. Starting my own business. See, in marketing I'd learned a ton over the years. I had clients who trusted me, coworkers who respected me, and ideas that kept me awake at night. One evening, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of wine, I thought, why not me? Why not now? So I did it. I filed the paperwork, built a small website, and called it North Star Creative. At first, it was just me freelancing out of my apartment. I took on small businesses, local bakeries, yoga studios, even a dog grooming shop. But within months, word spread. People liked working with someone who actually cared, who listened, who knew what it felt like to start from scratch. The crazy part? Some of my biggest clients ended up being referrals from women who'd also gone through messy divorces. It was like we had this unspoken bond, this silent agreement that said, we rise together. Meanwhile, Mark wasn't doing so hot. Every now and then his name would pop up. Mutual friends, whispers at gatherings, even a random article about the collapse of the small tech firm he tried to run. One night, Jenny texted me, "Did you hear? Mark's place got repossessed." I didn't celebrate, but I also didn't feel guilty for not feeling sorry. That was his path. Mine was different. And then came the twist I didn't see coming. One evening, as I was locking up after meeting a client at a cafe in Plano, I saw him, Mark, standing by his car, looking thinner, older, tired. For a split second my stomach dropped. Old reflex. But then I realized I wasn't scared. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even bitter. I was calm. He walked up and said, "Hey." Just that. I nodded. "Hey." He asked how I was. I told him the truth. I'm good. Really good. He looked at me almost surprised and said, "You look happy." I wanted to laugh because it was the first time in years I truly believed it myself. But instead I smiled and said, "I am." He hesitated like he wanted to say more. Maybe even apologize, maybe even ask for another chance. But I didn't give him the space. I just wished him well and walked away. That walk to my car, it felt like crossing a finish line. Because the truth is, I didn't need closure from him. I had given it to myself. From then on, everything felt lighter. My business kept growing. I hired 2 part-time assistants. I finally moved into a little townhouse with a backyard where Max could run around. I hosted game nights, took road trips, even signed up for a pottery class just because I wanted to. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that's the lesson I want to leave you with. You don't always get to control what happens to you. People can betray you, leave you, disappoint you in ways you never imagined. But you do get to control how you rebuild. For me, it meant finding strength I didn't know I had. It meant crying on my mom's couch, then standing up the next morning and going to work anyway. It meant letting myself laugh again, letting myself dream again, and eventually letting myself be proud of who I'd become. So, if you're watching this and you feel stuck in a toxic relationship or you're scared of what life looks like on the other side, hear me when I say this. You are stronger than you think. One day you'll wake up and realize the shadow is gone. One day you'll smile without even realizing it. One day you'll look at yourself and say, "I am enough." Because you are. And as for me, well, I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you connected with it, please leave a comment and tell me what part hit home for you. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I've got more stories to share, and trust me, you don't want to miss them.